Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar entitled Artisan Cheese and Fatty Acids. This is part of the Artisan Cheese webinar series. Just briefly about me, my name is Jana Kraft. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Animal and Veterinary Sciences at the University of Vermont, and I also hold a secondary appointment at the Department of Medicine and at the Department of Nutrition and Food Sciences here at the University of Vermont. I divided my presentation into 4 parts. I will be starting with an overview about dairy fat and its fatty acids. I will then move into cheese and its composition. Then I will give you some exciting results from our recent study in artisanal cheese, specifically on fatty acids in these cheeses. And then I will end my presentation with a conclusion and take-home message. So moving right into my first section of the presentation, milk, of course, is a raw material for all dairy products, be it like yogurt, cheese, butter, and ice cream. And overall, dairy products are a very diverse group of foods, and all is derived from one raw material, milk. Milk is a very nutrient-dense product, meaning that it contains or is rich in many nutrients. It is rich in high-value protein, specifically also in high-value amino acids. Milk contains all essential amino acids. It contains many different vitamins, and it contains many minerals. All of us, we know it contains calcium, but it contains also like phosphorus, selenium, potassium, and so on. Beyond that, milk also contains lipids. It contains triglycerides, phospholipids, cholesterol, and all of them actually contain fatty acids, and the fatty acids are the primary type of lipid in milk. So let's have a closer look at the lipids in milk. So when we are drinking a glass of whole milk, 8 ounces, or it's like 244 grams in total of whole milk, this is 3.25%, at least in most states in the United States, except for California, where it's actually 3.5. 1 glass of whole milk contains about 8 grams of fat. The majority of that fat is made up of saturated fatty acids. It's about 70%. This is followed by roughly 25% of monounsaturated fatty acids. And then there's only a very small amount of so-called polyunsaturated fatty acids, making up approximately 5% of the total. So the question is now, we all heard likely of saturated fats, maybe also unsaturated fats, but what is the difference between these different types of fatty acids? Well, the difference lies actually in their chemical structure. So in nutrition, we usually divide fatty acids in 3 subcategories. One's called saturated fatty acids. The other ones are monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids. And they get their name from their number of double bonds. So saturated fatty acids contain no double bond, which is why they're called saturated. Monounsaturated fatty acids, as the name already implies with mono, contain 1 double bond. And polyunsaturated fatty acids contain at least 2 or more double bonds in the fatty acid structure. And because of these double bonds, this makes a big difference in terms of their whether they are solid or liquid at room temperature. So, for example, saturated fatty acids tend to be solid at room temperature. And then monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids tend to be liquid at room temperature. To give you a specific example, butter is relatively rich in saturated fatty acids, which is why butter is generally more solid at room temperature. Olive oil and sunflower oil or canola oil, because they're containing unsaturated fatty acids, tend to be liquid at room temperature. And as a rule of thumb, the more double bonds, the more liquid the oil. Just to give you another example, because olive oil is very rich in monounsaturated fatty acids, so just one double bond. When you actually put by chance olive oil in the fridge, you will actually see that it kind of flakes out, and this is just because it's very rich in monounsaturated fatty acids. So sunflower oil or canola oil in a fridge would not change its liquidity at all. So the question might arise now is like, why is dairy fat rich in saturated fatty acids? So the answer is lays actually in the rumen of the cow. As many of you know, although the cow is eating not as much fat, it's just at maximum about like 5% of the total diet, but the fats in the diet are mostly unsaturated. So they're monounsaturated, but mostly polyunsaturated. One might actually wonder, so how comes that the cow is producing so much saturated fatty acids if she is eating predominantly unsaturated fatty acids? Well, the problem lays in the rumen with rumen microbes, and here specifically actually the bacteria. Bacteria have actually problems with the unsaturated fatty acids. So once the cow is consuming the unsaturated fatty acids, that actually causes the bacteria not to grow at all, or it slows their growth altogether. So the bacteria actually have kind of a survival strategy against that, and that is that they convert these feed-derived mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids into saturated fatty acids. And these saturated fatty acids make their way into the mammary gland, and eventually there are in the milk and then hence in our dairy products. Just as a brief side note, I'm sure everyone has heard that saturated fats have in generally a relatively bad reputation. Saturated fats have been associated with an increased LDL cholesterol, which has been also associated with an increased risk in cardiovascular disease. And this is the reason why several health agencies like the American Heart Association, but also the dietary guidelines for Americans have been recommending to eat products with a lower content of saturated fatty acids. However, research has actually shown in the last 10 years that actually saturated fatty acid intake from dairy sources has been rather associated with neutral or with beneficial health effects. This has much to do with actually the so-called dairy matrix. And maybe as a side note, because this entire presentation is focused on cheese, especially for cheese, it has been shown that the consumption of cheese, and regardless of the saturated fatty acids, has been rather favorable in terms of human health outcomes. So beyond the saturated mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids, there's actually much more going on in milk. Milk fat contains more than 400 different fatty acids. That makes it actually the most complex fat mixture of all edible fats. And just to put this in context for you, olive oil, for example, contains about 15 different fatty acids, and for example, canola oil contains just about like 20 to 25 different fatty acids. So that tells you how complex milk fat is. And what you see down here in this picture, this is actually a so-called chromatogram. I produced this in my laboratory when we are analyzing fats. So each of these peaks are actually a designated fatty acid, and we can actually, this is basically a profile, and we can tell, like what type of, fat this is, or what, the cow has eaten and things like that. So here I'm showing just a brief table of the fatty acid composition of milk. As I mentioned before, there are like more than 400 different fatty acids, but actually the majority of these fatty acids are present in very, very small amounts, usually less than 0.01%. And the majority of the fatty acids we analyze, they're actually just about like 15 different fatty acids present at or above 1% of concentration. Beyond the complexity of the fatty acids, milk is also such a rich source of bioactive fatty acids. And these are actually also born in the rumen of the dairy cow. So we have bacteria, we have protozoa, but we also have archaea, fungi, and phages, and they live in this relationship with the dairy cow. But it's specifically the bacteria and protozoa that are producing a wide variety of bioactive fatty acids. It's part of their typical metabolism. So they're making these as part of their living in the rumen. And eventually these bioactive fatty acids produced by the bacterium protozoa, they're outflowing out of the rumen, they're transported in the blood to the mammary gland, and then in the mammary gland, they're secreted into the milk fat, and eventually these bioactive fatty acids are in our dairy products, such as milk, butter, cheese, yogurt, and ice cream. And these unique or bioactive fatty acids, they confirm many beneficial effects in terms of health overall. And this is what is being shown in this next slide. There are short and medium chain fatty acids, there are chain fatty acids, branched chain fatty acids, and then there are like other fatty acids you might have heard of, CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. They're falling into this category. So short and medium chain fatty acids, they're known for providing us with a quick energy source. They lower blood lipid levels. They're also important in terms of mitigation of weight gain and adiposity. And it's also been shown that they improve glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity, so meaning that they're helping in preventing type 2 diabetes. Odd chain fatty acids, these are fatty acids that have odd numbers in their chain, so like 15 or 17. And these have been shown to reduce risk for cardiovascular disease, but also the risk for type 2 diabetes. Branched chain fatty acids are a group of fatty acids that have branch in their chain. There are mainly the focus of research in my lab, as they have, it has been shown they inhibit tumor growth, they're having anti-obesity properties, they modulate inflammation, and they also improve pancreatic beta cell function, which means that they basically help to prevent potentially type 2 diabetes. And lastly, for the other fatty acids, where, for example, conjugated linoleic acid fall in, or vaccinic acid, they have been shown to reduce the risk for cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, inflammatory diseases, improve insulin sensitivity, but it's also been shown that they lower blood lipid levels altogether. So the take-home message from here is that milk fat, or fat in general in dairy products, is very rich in bioactive fatty acids, and they have many health promoting effects when consumed. So this brings me to the next topic of my presentation, cheese in general. So cheese is a very diverse category of dairy, as you know. There are about like 2,000 different varieties of cheese reported. And in fact, it's been shown that there are likely even more different or more cheese types than just the 2,000 varieties. We are just not knowing about this. And I actually have a colleague in France. She's a cheese specialist, and she already claimed that about like 1,000 cheese varieties are just alone in France. So this gives you a good idea, how diverse this whole dairy category is. So we find like fresh cheese, we find soft cheese, semi-soft cheese, hard cheese, ripened, unripened. So this is a really, really large category of dairy. And the structure overall of the cheese, be it like soft or hard, semi-soft, but also the nutritional composition varies greatly dependent on the milk type. Think about like whether we are using milk from goats, from sheep, or from cows. Then the breed is very important as well. Whether the milk comes from Jersey, from Holstein, from Brown Swiss. Basically, the milk type also, defines the composition of the milk. So that's really important. Then it depends, the structural and nutritional composition depends on milk treatment. So think about whether we are using raw milk or if the milk is being heat treated. Overall, the manufacturing process plays a very important role. And then, of course, ripening conditions play an important role as well. So overall, the processing of milk into cheese causes major physical chemical changes, but also microbiological changes, biochemical changes. And that actually results in a characteristic texture, a characteristic flavor and aroma of the cheese. But in the end, the nutrient composition, including the fatty acids, are also impacted altogether. To give you an idea about this, so this you have seen before, this is the typical nutrient composition of milk, where we have 88%, so the majority of the milk is actually water, and we have 3% of proteins and lipids, 5% almost of carbohydrates, and some minerals and vitamins. And this, once the milk is processed into cheese, and this is just an example of one type of cheese, in this case, Swiss cheese, the composition is changing completely. So we're going down from, in terms of water, from 88 to 38%. We are also at that point, we are concentrating lipids to 30%. We are concentrating proteins, but we're also concentrating minerals and vitamins. And in addition to this, we are also gaining some other components, such as like live bacteria or fermentation products. So the final product following cheese manufacture completely changes. And since this presentation is focusing on the lipids and specifically on the fatty acids, this actually brings me to my next point, where we looked into the fatty acids in cheese. So I'm going to present you with results from a recent study in artisanal cheese. So this was a study conducted in Vermont. And the goal was to determine the fatty acid composition, which means percent, and the content. So this means in gram per serving of cheese, and selected artisanal cheese produced in Vermont. So we worked with two farms. One of our partner farms was Jasper Hill Farm, situated in Greensboro, Vermont, basically part of the Northeast Kingdom. And our second farm was the Springbrook Farm. Springbrook Farm is situated in Reading, Vermont. From each of these two cheese making facilities, we received 3 different types of cheeses, and I want to start here with Jasper Hill. So we received Whitney, Harbison, and Alpha Tolman. Whitney is an Alpine style cheese. It's made from raw Holstein milk, and it's derived from a single herd in Glover, Vermont. And this cheese is ripened between 3 to 6 months. Harbison is a bark wrapped, which you can see here, bloomy rind cheese. It's derived from pasteurized Holstein milk, and it's primarily Holstein, but because it comes from several local herds in Greensboro, there could be a few like Brown Swiss and Jersey contributing to the milk as well. This cheese is ripened between 6 to 13 weeks. And then we have Alpha Tolman. Alpha Tolman is an Alpine style cheese derived from raw Holstein milk. This is again from a single herd in Glover, Vermont. And this cheese is ripened between 8 to 12 months. Moving on to Springbrook Farm, we had here 3 different cheeses. We had Reading, Ashbrook, and Tarrantees. Reading is a raclette style cheese. It is derived from raw milk from Jersey's, from the Springbrook Farm, and 2 Vermont partner dairies. And this cheese is ripened at least for 3 months. Ashbrook is a French Morbier-inspired cheese. It's also derived from the raw Jersey milk from Springbrook Farm and 2 Vermont dairy partner dairies. I understand that Ashbrook Farm, Ashbrook milk cheese is actually coming from one milking, and this cheese is ripened for at least 3 months. And last but not least, Tarentese. It's an Alpine style cheese. This again comes from raw milk, from Jersey milk, comes solely from Springfield Farm, and this cheese is ripened for at least 9 months in total. So this slide shows you the composition based on the big 3 groups: the saturated fatty acids, monosaturated fatty acids, and the polyunsaturated fatty acids. To orient you on this graph, so on the x-axis we have on the left side the 3 cheeses from Jasper Hill, Whitney, Harbison, and Alpha Tolman, and on the right side we have the 3 cheeses from Springfield Farm, Reading, Ashbrook, and Tarentese. And what you can see is that the saturated fatty acid content makes up the majority of the total fatty acids. This is not new, of course, and I discussed this earlier. Saturated fatty acids are the major fatty acid type in dairy. But what you can see is that overall, Harbison had the lowest content of saturated fatty acids with 64%, as opposed to Whitney and Alpha Tolman. And then we have here on the right side, Reading, Ashbrook, and Tarentese. They all have saturated fatty acid contents above 70%. This is not surprising either, because the milk is derived from Jersey cows, and Jersey cows are known to have a higher saturated fatty acid content due to a higher amount of de novo synthesized fatty acids, which are saturated. What we also can see is similar to the milk overall, we see about like between 25 or 20, 24, 23, and all the way up to 31% of monounsaturated fatty acids. Harbison again has here the highest amount, and Harbison also has the highest amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids. But overall, as you can see, polyunsaturated fatty acids are relatively low in all of the cheeses. But clearly there are some differences between the different cheeses, likely due to different raw material, meaning the milk, the milk type, but there is also the possibility that these are different due to different processing methodologies, but also the ripening. So this graph shows you different bioactive or health-promoting fatty acids. I just selected a few. One of them is so-called vaccinic acid. Just an interesting tidbit. Vaccinic acid got its name from the cow because vacca in Latin means the cow. So they actually found this fatty acid first in actually butter. So that's one of their typical fatty acids you find. Then here we have in red conjugated linoleic acids, or most of you will know that as CLA. And then there are these so-called branched chain fatty acids in kind of this cream color. And what you can see is that specifically Harbison is very rich in vaccinic acid, and it's also rich in conjugated linoleic acid, basically richer than in comparison to the other cheeses. On the side from the Springfield Farm, especially Reading, was really rich in vaccinic acid and was also rich in conjugated linoleic acids. Overall, what you also can see is that there are slight differences in the ratio between vaccinic acid and conjugated linoleic acid. It's on a smaller side, for example, between for Whitney, it's very large in Harbison, but it's also relatively large in Reading and Ashbrook. So overall, the take-home message from this slide is that regardless of the cheese type, though, the cheeses we analyzed, they're all really good sources of health-promoting fatty acids, but there are differences in these fatty acids depending on the cheese, likely depending upon the raw material, the milk, but also, again, the processing might actually play a role here as well. This slide shows the so-called omega 6 to omega-3 ratio. So that's basically a calculation where we use all omega-6 fatty acids, specifically though linoleic acid, which is an essential fatty acid, and we take the sum of these and divide that by the sum of all omega-3 fatty acids, but it's mainly linolenic acid. Again, linolenic acid is a essential fatty acid as well. And what you can see here is that the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is low for all of them. We have the lowest omega-6 to omega-3 ratio actually in Reading. Here the ratio was 2.5. And the highest we found was in Whitney. And in Whitney we had a ratio of, excuse me, of 3.5. So overall, you know, while we are seeing actually differences, the ratio is really low. So I just want to put this a little bit in perspective for you. So as I mentioned earlier, omega-6 and omega-3 are actually both essential fatty acids. They're playing both a really important role in our body. They have different functions. They have functions in our cells. They have functions in our brain, functions in our eyes as well. But a higher amount of omega-6 fatty acids in the diet has been associated with inflammatory responses, whereas a higher amount of omega-3 fatty acids has been associated with anti-inflammatory responses. So currently, in the US, that on average, the American is eating almost like 15 times more of omega-6 fatty acids when compared to omega-3, which usually causes like an inflammatory response. The ideal diet, however, is regarded to having a more balanced ratio. So typically, we are looking for a ratio of 1:1 or 1:5 in order to have like an anti-inflammatory response. So coming back to our cheese, overall, you know, you can see very nicely here with this line is 1:5, 5:1. The ratio of the omega-6 to omega-3 is optimal in cheese. And even there's some variation here. Overall, cheese has an optimal ratio overall. Now moving on to the fatty acid content per serving. So that means we're taking like 1 serving of cheese. 1 serving is like 1 ounce or 28 grams. Per serving, Reading contains 7 grams of fat, Ashbrook 8, and Tarentaise as well. And what you can see here is that overall, Ashbrook and Tarentaise are both pretty similar in terms of saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So this is, of course, a reflection of, you know, having the same amount of fat, but they're also relatively similar in terms of their fatty acid distribution. And here on the left side, we have Reading. Reading has a lower content of saturated fatty acids. Not only that, Reading was slightly lower in saturated fatty acids, but also, of course, it has, you know, like it contains only 7 grams as opposed to 8 grams. But overall, all 3 of them are pretty comparable across the board. Here I'm showing different fatty acids. I just picked several ones which are of interest, but which also showed up a little bit different and might be a reason of or due to like processing. I looked and also of course the diet. So I looked at omega-3 fatty acids here in blue, conjugated linoleic acids in red, and then in cream color we have branched chain fatty acids, and down here we have short chain fatty acids in yellow. And kind of a light teal, light green, we have like a sum of unique dairy-derived fatty acids. So what you can see here is that specifically for omega-3 fatty acids, overall all pretty comparable, but what we can see is that Tarentaise contains a slightly higher amount of omega-3 fatty acids compared to Reading and Ashbrook. On the other hand, Redding, which is actually, remember, just, like 1 gram less fat as compared to the other ones, contains actually a higher content of conjugated linoleic acids. As for the branched chain fatty acids, they're actually pretty comparable across the board. Then here we are looking at the short chain fatty acids. So they are slightly higher in ashbrook and Tarentese, but this is also likely a reflection of the total content of fat. Short chain fatty acids are a really interesting fatty acid group, besides having favorable health effects, but they also impart flavor. So usually there's an association with the amount of short chain fatty acids and flavor as well. But overall, as you can see, they're all pretty comparable. Tarentese has a slightly higher amount of unique dairy-derived fatty acids. Moving on to Jasper Hill Farm cheese. So again, 1 gram, one serving is 28 grams or 1 ounce. Whitney contains 7 grams of total fat, Harbison 6, and Alpha Tolman is 10 grams. Starting off with the saturated fatty acids, overall, Harbison has the lowest content of saturated fatty acids. That's a reflection, of course, of the lower fat content, but also as a reminder, Harbison also contained 64% of saturated fatty acids as opposed to 70. So this is not surprising that the amount is significantly lower. In terms of Alpha Tolman, you see that the saturated fatty acid content is higher here, but this again is a reflection of the fatty acid of the fat content. So Alpha Tolman contains 10 grams as opposed to 6 grams. So this is like 65% more fat, and hence we are seeing some higher amount of saturated fatty acids in this product. But overall, similar kind of distribution of all of these fatty acid classes. And here I'm showing, again, omega-3 fatty acids, CLA, branched chain fatty acids, short chain fatty acids, and unique fatty acids. So here again, Harbison seems unique among the 3 different cheeses. It's unique because it contains the highest amount of CLA in comparison to Alpha Tolman and Whitney, regardless of having actually less fat, so 6 grams as opposed to 7 and 10 grams. And it also contains a relatively high amount of omega-3. Overall, Alpha Tolman contains the highest amount or provides the highest amount of omega-3 fatty acids, but this is also because Alpha Tolman contains 10 grams of fat. But nonetheless, what I also would like to point out is that, while vaccinic omega-3 fatty acids are higher in Whitney and Alpha Tolman than CLA, this ratio is actually reversed in Harbison. So again, this is actually pointing towards not only like differences in the original product, but it also might be due to some changes that occur during the processing. And last but not least, here I'm showing short chain fatty acids and unique dairy-derived fatty acids. Overall, Alpha Tolman contains the highest amount of short chain fatty acids due to the 10 grams of fat, but it's likely also has some bearing on the flavor or on aroma. And the amount of total unique dairy-derived fatty acids is also highest in Alpha Tolman, again, likely due to the higher amount of fat. But overall, similar to Springwood Farm, the cheese from Jasper Hill Farm contains a higher amount or a large amount of bioactive fatty acids. So this brings me to the last part of my webinar, to the conclusion and take-home message. So overall, cheese is a significant source of fat in the human diet, and it contains a large variety of fatty acids. It also contains many fatty acids which have the potential to improve long-term health. We just have to kind of investigate this further. I think there's a lot of nutrition studies needed, a lot of randomized controlled studies needed in order to prove this. But as far as the fatty acid composition and the fatty acid content goes, these point towards like beneficial health effects. Again, yet we need to prove this in trials. And lastly, the content of fatty acids in cheese is obviously primarily dependent on the levels in the milk, which is our raw material, but it has also become obvious that processing may play a role as well. And this is actually something that was rather interesting and should be also researched in future, how we can control these kind of changes and how we can improve even more the amount of bioactive fatty acids in cheese. With that one, I would like to acknowledge the funding source, the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, for funding our study. I would like to acknowledge our research team. Specifically, I'd like to thank Heather Darby. She's the lead of our group for this project. A special shout out to Jasper Hill Farm and Springbrook Farm, who worked with us very closely. It's been a wonderful relationship with them, and I'm very proud and happy that we were able to work with them. And lastly, I would like to acknowledge my lab members. I'm only like a small puzzle piece in a big puzzle, and my lab members, my students, my undergraduate students, my graduate students, but also my postdocs are playing a major role in my research, and they are the ones that are truly conducting the research in the lab, and therefore I would like to thank them as well. And with that one, this is the end of my webinar. Thank you for listening to the webinar. Here I have my email address. If you have any questions, please reach out and contact me. And here on Twitter, you can also follow us, what we are doing in the lab under @UVM_craft lab. And with that one, thanks for listening.